illegal gold mining, exotic animal trafficking, expanding coca fields. The profits from cocaine are now being reinvested in industries feeding an environmental crisis. The tri-border area where Colombia, Brazil, and Peru meet is a perfect hub for smuggling, a place defined by environmental degradation, high levels of violence, and rampant drug trafficking. 25 years ago, Leticia in Colombia and Tabatinga in Brazil were peaceful. But today, they're caught in a turf war between Brazil's two largest criminal organizations, the Red Command and the PCC. These groups finance local election campaigns, enforce rules of conduct, and punish anyone who disobeys. For many local residents, these criminal groups dictate daily life. In these cities, the Red Command now oversees not only drug trafficking, but also wildlife smuggling and illegal gold mining. The power this group has in the region is accelerating deforestation and biodiversity loss in the Amazon. But why these particular cities? All these countries are deeply tied to the cocaine trade. According to the Global Organized Crime Index, Colombia scores 9.5 out of 10, followed closely by Brazil and Peru with 9 out of 10. Brazil also ranks as the world's second worst offender for both flora and fauna crimes on the OC index. This includes illegal logging, deforestation, and illegal mining. With me to discuss this is Gabriel Funari. Gabriel coordinates the Observatory of Illicit Economies in the Amazon Basin at the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. He is also the author of the report Illicit Frontiers: Criminal Governance in the Amazon Tri-Border Region. Gabriel, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Now, can you start by describing what it is like in Leticia and Tabatinga? What kind of organized criminal activities are taking place, and how does that affect people's everyday lives?
So yeah, Leticia and Tabatinga, they're kind of very unique urban hubs. And we were interested in undertaking this research in this location precisely because of the unique characteristics of these two cities. Firstly, geographically, we're talking about two cities that are located deep in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, almost in the geographic midpoint of the Amazon River, in between the three largest countries of the region. So these are two very important kind of population centers. And we were also interested in this idea because a lot of the time when we're talking about environmental crime and organized crime in the Amazon, it's easy to associate these dynamics with forest territories, right? When we're talking about the Amazon. But I think it's important to recognize that cities, urban spaces in the Amazon are highly strategic for organized crime. And they're kind of very important, both as kind of logistical hubs, but also as kind of points for criminal groups to expand throughout the region. Cities and forest territories are deeply integrated with each other, and we need to understand a little bit better how cities in the Amazon work, especially when it comes to illicit economies. And Lechis and Tabatinga are kind of perfect exemplars to do this because they're, in many ways, kind of very important for a variety of different criminal trades in the region. So first, drug trafficking. This has been a region, because this is a particular junction where the Amazon River flows through its Andean roots and arrives into Brazil in Tabatinga, right? So Leticia is in the Colombian side, Tabatinga is on the Brazilian side. And once the Amazon River crosses into Brazil, it basically offers drug traffickers direct links to international ports on the Brazilian coast. And from there, they can export cocaine to Europe mainly, but also North America and to West Africa. So since the 70s, really, Lechis and Tabatinga has been very important to connect the cocaine-producing regions in Colombia and Peru with these ports on the Brazilian coast, right? They're kind of halfway between the production points and the export points in the region. So this is where drug traffickers have long, stopped to refuel and restock in supplies. Pablo Escobar and Medellin cartel they got their start running this route, southwards from the Colombian producing regions into the Brazilian Amazon, running cocaine through there. So this has always been a very important region for drug trafficking, and also wildlife trafficking. I mean, the surrounding territory of Leticia Tabatinga is kind of unparalleled biodiversity, and particularly when it comes to exotic fish like the pirarucu, which is the largest river fish in the world and is very rare. And more recently, we're seeing an uptick in illicit gold mining in this region. Illicit gold mining as a whole has proliferated across the Amazon over the past 10 years. And we see several hotspots there in that tri-border region as well, where gold is being mined. And it's illicit because it's in indigenous territory where any mining is prohibited. And it uses illicit methods like the use of mercury. So these are kind of the three main illicit economies. But Lechis and Tabatinga are kind of They're twin cities, but it's a single urban sprawl that we're talking about here. So Leticia on the Colombian side, Tabatinga on the Brazilian side, it's the same city. If you look at day-to-day life, you have families that live across the two cities. There are no checkpoints in the border, so you can go in between the two cities seamlessly. So these cities are kind of prominent trading hubs, both for the indigenous communities that live nearby. In the wider territory of the tri-border region, you have around 18 indigenous ethnicities, and they all go to Leticia and Tabatinga to purchase supplies, to purchase food. So these are densely populated urban spaces with a lot of socioeconomic inequality. Over the past 20 years, these cities have grown a lot in population. Combined, Leticia and Tabatinga are around 110,000 people that live there. And 25 years ago, there's probably half of that. So there's been a massive uptick in population, mostly around informal urban settlements. You're in a very cosmopolitan place because you see, different languages being spoken, lots of people, like intense commercial flux. But you see a lot of poverty. You see a lot of, drugs being sold at the local level. It's kind of, this is what somewhat might seem unusual. Is it has similar characteristics to other kind of large urban centers in Latin America, but you're deep inside the Amazon rainforest, right? So there's kind of these strange paradoxes.
No, that's a very comprehensive answer, and it actually paints a very vivid portrait of what it looks like and what are some of the key issues there. Now, you also said that that area is like a biodiversity hotspot, right? There's a lot of great things that should be protected, essentially, but also you talked about the illegal mining using mercury, which, as we know, is extremely toxic. So, what are some of the environmental impacts that are resulting from the criminal activities that you talked about? Illegal logging, cocaine production, gold mining, etc.
Biodiversity loss is a massive thing. So because wildlife trafficking is so intense there, both for fish but also other local fauna, mercury contamination as well. So the local waterways all have high levels of concentration of mercury. The Amazon River is massive, spans thousands of kilometers, but it also has many tributaries and many streams that connect to it. And a lot of these alluvial mining spots are in kind of super remote locations on the banks of these kind of very remote streams, but they'll all connect down to the Amazon River. And Leticia and Tabatinga sit right on the banks of the Amazon. So mercury contamination is a major issue, and fish, obviously, this being like the major food staple is fish. So that's kind of the major issue. And then you have coca cultivation, particularly on the Peruvian side of the tri-border, that has also led to increased deforestation. And I think it's important to note, like in relative terms, the major driver of deforestation in the Amazon as a whole is cattle ranching. You're felling trees to raise cattle to export to the US or Europe or even for the Brazilian domestic market. So in relative terms, the kind of environmental harms from coca cultivation aren't as big as some of the other activities in the Amazon, both legal and illegal. This has been an area that has avoided deforestation in the past, and now it's becoming a deforestation hotspot. And coca cultivation is helping to drive that.
Now, you were earlier talking about this criminal governance on everyday lives, right? What kind of impact does it have on local people? And given that these two cities are deep in the Amazon, we're talking about lots of indigenous communities as well, right? So I'm sure that the impact of this will also be felt by them.
And this tri-border region has the largest population of uncontacted indigenous communities in the world. So indigenous communities that prefer to, not to remain isolated and not interact with Western civilization. But that's kind of severely under threat because of the encroachment of these criminal groups that invade indigenous communities to engage in illicit wildlife trafficking, to engage in drug trafficking. You're seeing a lot of forced recruitment of indigenous youth to go work in these coca plantations that are being set up in the Peruvian part of the tri-border region. You're seeing both boys being sent to work as farmhands in these coca plantations, and also girls being used for being sent to work as cooks. But really, there's a lot of sex trafficking going on as well. When we talk to people there, a lot of the times these indigenous youth, they're paid in the coca plantations. The currency that they're paid with is with the drugs themselves, is with cocaine-based paste. and they're encouraged to go back to their communities and sell this cocaine-based paste as kind of a way to make more money than the salary they would earn in these coca plantations, right? They're also sending mules, so it's kind of just young kids, minors mostly, carrying 5 to 10 kilos of cocaine, either in these kind of passenger vessels or in the daily flights from Tabatinga to Manaus. And that's kind of and every day kind of indigenous youth are arrested there as mules, and then they're sent to prison where they then become fully integrated with criminal organizations. Anyway, so there are kind of dynamics that are kind of facilitate themselves, and kind of it kind of generates this very perverse cycle of violence.
Mm, I definitely want to follow up with you around the prison and the young people, but let's first start by talking about how did Letitia and Tabashinga, go from being peaceful places to having some of the highest murder rates in South America in what can be considered a fairly short span of 25 years, right?
Like I said at the beginning, this has always been a kind of route for transnational drug trafficking, right? But during the early days, when you had the Colombian cartels running these drug routes, drug trafficking occurred in a relatively peaceful way. You had kind of local criminal brokers who helped the like of Pablo Escobar to run drugs through these territories. But these criminal operatives, they didn't seek to govern local communities. They're kind of charismatic, kind of old school criminal bosses. They were well known. They were kind of political authorities even, and they were known in the communities as kind of criminal bosses, right? But they didn't sell drugs in the local communities. They didn't seek to impose rules. And that starts to change around the 2000s when you have the Comando Vermelho, which is the Red Command, which is one of the largest criminal groups in Brazil. They arrive in this region and they reach an agreement with the FARC, with the Colombian guerrilla group, where the FARC would provide cocaine that it would cultivate in its own territories. And in Leticia and Tabachinga, they would exchange cocaine for weapons that the Red Command would provide to them. And this is the first instance where you have a large Brazilian criminal group operating in the area. And very quickly, the PCC, which is the Red Command's main kind of rival in Brazilian organized crime, also arrives in the Amazon and also starts to move drugs through this territory. And this has to do, I mean, there's a lot of, you can call it geopolitics of crime, but there's a lot of dynamics that are pushing, these criminal groups are going to the Amazon region for a lot of different reasons. The first is that the Amazon offers a lot of strategic advantages for organized crime because it's such a vast area, because there is minimal state presence, and also because it's, on a basic level, it's impossible to police thousands of kilometers of waterways, So that is an advantage for criminal groups, right? They can operate in this area where they're going to suffer less scrutiny from state authorities, where borders are porous, where they can move across these different countries, including the coca producing regions of Peru and Colombia, with relative ease. So this is what has led, over the last 2 decades, these Brazilian criminal groups to start to prioritize Lichis and Tabachinga as kind of an important place to base themselves in. This is the change, right? Because the old criminal bosses, they didn't bother with governing the local areas. Whereas these Brazilian criminal groups, they specialize, like they're there to make money and they operate as criminal firms, but they're also concerned with governance, right? They want to make sure that they're able to have some degree of territorial dominance or territorial control over the areas that they operate. And they quickly discovered that basing themselves in Leticia and Tabachinga allows them to diversify into other illicit economies. So these two groups, the Red Command and the PCC, started to fight each other, basically, for control over the Amazon River route. And this is where violence starts to get out of control.
Yeah, and it's also really sobering to hear how quickly things can change, right? And how it seems to be getting progressively worse. Speaking of which, you earlier spoke about, criminal groups governing in prisons as well, how this led to the recruitment of young people in organized crime. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is kind of both the Red Command and the PCC are prison-based criminal organizations, right? So they're groups that were launched inside of Brazilian penitentiaries, and their leaders are all in prison and operate these massive drug trafficking operations from behind bars. And their method of expansion into the Amazon was precisely by expanding into prisons, right? So they would recruit local inmates to affiliate themselves to the organization. and with that, recruit kind of more low-level criminal operatives who go in and out of prison for kind of minor drug offenses. But what happens a lot of the time, especially in Leches and Tabatinga, where prisons are kind of suffer like very serious institutional shortfalls of like chronic food shortages. You have guards that aren't paid. You have prisons that are privatized, but are highly corrupt. It's kind of institutionally these prisons don't work, and criminal groups are the only kind of entities inside the prisons that are offering some degree of order. So if you affiliate yourself to a criminal group, they'll basically guarantee your physical protection. They'll provide you with hygiene products. They'll provide you with food, send payments to your family behind bars. You have kind of everyday new inmates coming to the prisons that kind of, and who are inevitably left with very little choice but to join these criminal groups. And so the prisons become these kind of universities of crime, right? Where these kind of low-level criminal operatives can become fully integrated with criminal organizations. And then once they're released, once they go out, they're obviously still affiliated, and they will, try to accomplish the goals of these criminal groups.
Let's look specifically into Brazil, right? And if I'm not wrong, under Brazil's environmental crime legislation, trafficking of animals is considered a minor offense. Do you think that may contribute to how prevalent this criminal activity is? And has is enough being done to actually combat this?
When it comes to environmental crimes like illicit wild trafficking, these are kind of low risk, high reward activities for criminal actors, right? If you're caught with cocaine or with drugs, like you are likely to face severe penalties. If you're caught with illicit gold or with illicit wildlife, you're less likely to suffer any significant consequences from that, right? So that does serve as kind of a continuous incentive for criminal actors to operate in the space. And this is why kind of illicit wildlife trafficking, particularly the trafficking of pirarucu fish, is arguably the largest local illicit economy in this tri-border region.
Now, given that, this type of crime, wildlife trafficking, sort of receives less scrutiny, right, than cocaine, as you said, is it possible that, drug cartels are using this kind of criminal activity to actually launder their money?
Yeah, and it gets to a kind of recurrent issue that isn't talked about enough, that money laundering strategies are also at the same time strategies of diversifying investments and amplifying criminal revenue, right? So they're engaging in these other criminal trades, not just to hide revenue from the drug trade, but also to make more money. So this is where initially they may have invested in these activities to launder the drug proceeds. Now it's kind of part of like, wow, we can make even more money engaging in these other environmental crimes.
Well, thank you so much, Gabriel, for your fascinating insights. And you can read Gabriel's report, Illicit Frontiers, Criminal Governance in the Amazon's Tri-Border Region, on the Global Initiative website. And to learn more about criminal